Hello, this is Kristina Younkman, and I'm going to share my case study for EDL 854, Building Finance, and this case study is entitled The Budget Debacle. This case study has to do with a school who chooses to do a raffle fundraiser, and so I'm going to share the cases with you and the facts that I do know. The specific school is giving, their superintendent gives budget money every year for their basic curriculum. However, the district's curriculum does focus on the basic skills, and the educational instructional objectives at the elementary school are based on student performance, and that is what supports and emphasizes the basic skills instruction. So in the past, there was a funding supplementary curriculum, and it's led to a lot of confusion and a lot of competition between schools because the schools are in charge of raising enough money for any supplementary curriculum. There is a foundation that leads this, and they decide on how the money is going to be spent and how they're going to raise the money. The principal, myself, Mr. Santos, has always agreed with the foundation recommendations, and then he forwards that on to the curriculum, site council curriculum committee, and that's where they determine how that money will be spent. Mr. Santos does meet with Mr. Bearley and talks about the roles and responsibilities of the fundraiser. And they talk about ideas and what could possibly be the money could be raised for. As I said, it creates a lot of competition. And then once the fundraiser is over, the money is handed over to myself, the principal, and I place it in a budget for that supplementary curriculum. And so this year, Mr. Bearley has chosen to have a raffle fundraiser. So let's talk about when and where certain events occurred. Everything here takes place at Briardale Elementary School. We're assuming it doesn't give any specifics, but any of the meetings that happened before the fundraiser were held somewhere in the school. We're assuming an office or a meeting room. And this is also where the annual foundation fundraiser was held. So let's get into who is involved so that you can understand a little bit more about the case. So Briardale Elementary School is a school with about 600 students in grades K through 5. It is a building and school in the middle of town, and so it's a very diverse community. And so that school is chosen for a lot of town meetings and events just because of the location of it. Mr. Santos, myself, I am the school site principal. And I am very confident in running the school, and I feel comfortable with managing the budget at that school. The school is, in addition to other schools in the district, there are 6 elementary schools in the district, 2 middle school, and 1 high school. And this is a town where the majority of teachers have been there for a long time, and there's not a lot of turnover, and there's very few resignations, so the teachers are very happy there. The parents are very supportive of Briardale and the supplemental programs, and so the foundation has been created in order to help supplement the art, music, and foreign language areas. So I've mentioned Mr. Bearley. This is an actual parent who volunteers and is the president of the foundation. He is a Harvard graduate, and he is very motivated to raise money for the school for those supplementary programs. Crowdfunding is a very popular fundraiser that we learned a lot about throughout this course, but Mr. Bearley, because of his being competitive, he enjoys the raffle because he remembers back in college he raised more than $100,000 by selling raffle tickets for an opportunity there. So he has chosen, instead of crowdfunding or another type of method, he has chosen to do a raffle. Another person that I want to make sure you're aware of is Mr. Morley. He is another school's foundation president, and he was a former classmate of Mr. Bearley, and he actually defeated Mr. Bearley out of the class president spot. So there just seems to be a lot of competition there. And we also want to talk about our superintendent. I mentioned earlier, he provides funds for the school budgets. Okay, we also have our school site curriculum committee, and this is actually led by a teacher, and they're the ones that help decide exactly what curriculum will be purchased. We have other community members and parents throughout the case study who are very supportive. And then, unfortunately, we have a sheriff and a tipster involved in this case study. The sheriff is one that we will find out actually books and releases Mr. Barely eventually. And the tipster is a community member who obviously knew and was aware of raffle laws in their area and state. So now that we know who's all involved, let's move into the legal and ethical issues. So I truly feel like negligence on my part happened here. And I refer to an article in our case in our class where it talks about what negligence is. And it's basically the failure to exercise the standard of care as a reasonable person. It's undue indifference toward the consequences of one's act, and it includes the notions of duty, breach of that duty, and result in damage. And again, I feel like I was negligent with not working more with Mr. Barely on the fundraiser. We don't know a whole lot about the state laws and the district laws with this specific case study, but I do know throughout the research that 46 states and the District of Columbia have enacted legislation that controls raffles. And organizations that sponsor a raffle, if they raise too much money, so anything over $25,000, they actually are required to file an application with the state. And I did some research through the Kansas Department of Revenue, and in Kansas, raffles are legal for nonprofits, which a school is nonprofit, but they must apply for that license if they make more than $25,000. Anything under that does not require a license. There was definitely some ethical concerns here. I feel like there was ethical concern with everybody involved, especially if they knew anything about the state or local laws that allowed or the specifics on raffles. There was definitely some ethical concern on the amount of competition with the other schools. I felt like that maybe had a lot to do with the end result as far as the competition with feeling like they needed to raise a large amount of money. Unfortunately, Mr. Barely was ended up with a misdemeanor on his record after all of this, and I'll tell more about that here in a little bit. Briardale Foundation will unfortunately have a negative reputation from now on because it probably is something that the community is not going to forget for a long time. As myself, I feel like as a principal, I'm going to have a negative mark on my career just because it happened in my building under my supervision. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, discriminated, or really harassed, and there was no breach of contract that we know of. Again, we don't know a lot of information on the district policy or their contracts. So continuing on with our legal and ethical issues, I thought it was interesting. One of the articles talked about how raising money to subsidize has increased because of school budgets. And that is a reason why school fundraising is cropping up everywhere. Again, I mentioned the crowd funding, and of course, raffles are becoming more popular. Also, according to our research, fundraising is a method that communities use to support the growth of their schools. And as a principal, I am often responsible for those activities, and it's my duty to ensure that the school uses the funds for the right purpose. And during and before the fundraising, it's also my responsibility to discuss the purpose with staff and the parents involved and the community. When a school decides to conduct a fundraiser, it is my responsibility to consider the guidelines of the public and local and state laws. So lots of important information there as far as the legal and ethical issues. So my sentence on exactly what has happened, basically it comes down to the annual fundraising event for Briardale Elementary was stopped by local law enforcement because the principal, myself, the foundation president, Mr. Barely, and foundation members were not aware or followed local and state raffle fundraising laws. So let's talk about the facts. As far as three categories, I've put them from people, place, and programs, and what we know and what we don't know about those. So we're going to start with people. We do know about myself, Mr. Santos. We don't know a lot about my history, and we don't know a whole lot about the district administration as far as the superintendent or any of my administrators above me. We do know as far as the foundation members, we know Mr. Barely and some other community members. We know a little bit about his background that I've already shared, but we don't know a whole lot about anybody else that was on that foundation. The curriculum committee, we don't know a lot of details either, besides we know it's headed by a teacher and that they're the ones that choose to make the curriculum decisions on what to spend the money on. We do know, I mentioned earlier, that parents are supportive of fundraisers, but we don't know a lot of details as far as the type of parents or any of their background. We also know community members are supportive and that the community uses the facilities at the school regularly. We don't have a lot of information on other teachers that the case study talked about, except for the fact that we know they are seasoned teachers because they have been there a while. And then we also need to make sure we talk about families and cultures that are represented. Again, we know we have a diverse community of people, but we don't know a lot about the details or the culture. So moving on, let's talk about the place. We do know that Briardale is a school located in the middle of the town. We know about the other schools in the district that I talked about as far as elementary, middle, and high school, but we don't know about any other surrounding towns and what other kind of schools are close by. And again, we talked about community demographics. We know that they are supportive. We know that the high school is a big football team, but we don't know a lot of other besides diverse. We don't know what the demographics necessarily are. When it talks about programs, I think it's important that we know more about other community groups that are available or that this school could work with. We do know it talked about the art, the music, and the foreign language, but we don't know what other curricular or extracurricular programs are available besides football at the high school. We do know that the curriculum is very basic and that they like to use the fundraising for supplemental curriculum. I think it's important that we know that the school site budget is partially funded by the superintendent, but then the rest of that is required by fundraising. And again, we don't know what that budget is. We don't have amounts, so we don't know that with this specific case study. And then we don't have a whole lot of information on school or district policies, which I think would be important for us with some of this information. And I might also add in there the local or state laws. So one of our resources that I thought was interesting is empowering budget owners with site level autonomy motivates and engages staff to make informed, data-driven decisions to best support the district's overall goals and improve student achievement. So I feel like this is really important here with our Briardale school. Okay, moving on to section 5, I want to talk about and review and prioritize the information. And I think it's really important that I kind of made this as a chart here, because one of the questions in the assignment ask is how could this case study damage the stakeholders or the community? And so I feel like our community has definitely been affected here. It has affected not only the community and the whole school, but then I broke that down as far as it affects the students because of the curriculum that is offered, and also the teachers because they're the ones that teach that curriculum. And so it's kind of like a trickling effect. You know, it was a community event that in turn affected both individual teachers and students. And then it definitely affected myself as a principal and my future record. It affects our district administration because they're the ones that also have to deal with it. In addition to our Board of Education. It definitely affects our site curriculum committee because they're the ones that have to decide how the money is spent, and it depends on how much money they have on what is going to be offered. And then then I also added community groups because I feel like it's important with this case study that, there may be other community groups or organizations that could offer to help with the curriculum. Obviously, they are also involved in the fundraiser when it happens. And then, as I stated, the principal, it definitely affected me because I feel like I kind of let my school and my community down. And so once I looked at all of this and learned all the information, I feel like I do have enough information as far as to make a data-informed and equitable plan that applies to the laws, policies, and regulations that supports my school improvement and my student development. And so, again, all of this information was reviewed, and this was kind of the priority that I came up with as far as the people that was affected. So next we're going to move into our options and what are some things that we could possibly do here with this case study. So I feel like the first option would be to do nothing and allow Mr. Bearley to continue as the foundation president. I feel like some consequences here, there would be continued legal issues with both Mr. Bearley and myself as the principal. There could possibly be a job loss on myself, and there would be no money for school curriculum if the fundraisers are shut down. So that could be our first option. Our second option would be to meet with Mr. Bearley and work with him closely and monitor fundraisers and ask the district for maybe possibly more monetary help with their curriculum. And so as far as consequences here, there's always going to be legal issues because Mr. Bearley is on probation. And I'm assuming there's not going to be a lot of budget money from the school since we're already having to make fundraisers for our curriculum. But that would be something that we could possibly look at. The third option would be to remove Mr. Bearley as the foundation president and appoint a newly possibly paid position as a staff member that is actually trained in fundraising policies and procedures so that we can apply the laws, policies, and regulations within our district and state. So the consequences here can be that Mr. Bearley and other parent supporters will be upset. I may have staff that are resistant to becoming trained and maybe not wanting to take on that responsibility. And then there may possibly be lack of money to pay staff for the training just because of the budgets with the school. And then our fourth and final option would be to do everything, including option 3, but combine some things. And that would be to combine our school site curriculum committee and the foundation committee into one and make sure that I'm educating all stakeholders in the community and also coming up with an apology for my community as the leader of the school. So consequences here could be a positive consequence would be that there's a lot of staff and community collaboration. There may be some resistance, however, though, from both the staff and the community about having to provide trainings. And just change sometimes is hard, and so there may be resistance there. However, I feel like this would have a positive impact on the future success and well-being of my students and staff as adults. So let's look at the pros and cons of the plan here. So let's start with our plan 1, which was do nothing. I feel like the pros here would be it avoids conflict and saves time. But the cons can be that there's still ethical concern. It shows poor leadership on my part. It affects the future success and well-being of staff and students. There would be no curriculum or limited money for curriculum. And there's going to be conflict among the school and community. Option 2 would be meeting with Mr. Bearley and monitoring him more closely. A pro to this, I feel like that is ethically a correct decision to do, which should have been done all along. It benefits our staff relations because we'll be working more closely with the parent group. And it shows good leadership and communication on my part. A con to this would be that it does require some extra time commitment. It's going to have some difficult conversations with Mr. Bearley and myself. And it can impact future relationships with parents and the community and the school. Legal issues are going to continue because we know Mr. Bearley is on probation. And then it can also have a negative impact on students and staff. So option 3 would be to remove Mr. Bearley as the foundation president. The pros to this would be that it reinforces the policies and laws of the district and the state. it would, since we're going to offer the staff training, it would provide training to them, and it would offer them a position that was paid. And there was a resource throughout our class that talked about how sponsors should be employees of the school anyway, and that was through the National Center for Educational Statistics. So those are all pros. The cons to this option would be we may lose parent support just because Mr. Barely and his supporters will not be possibly involved. It's going to require some uncomfortable conversations, and it can impact our future relationships. And, I may have refusal from staff to be the president and get trained. Our last option would be to combine, to use all of option 3 and then combine our committees. The pros would be there are fewer people to have to deal with on the committees. It shows good leadership and communication on my part. I am advocating for a data-informed and equitable plan that will support my school improvement and student improvement and development. The cons with this option would be it's going to be more time-consuming. The community may not be accepting of my apology, and we're open to more media scrutiny just because the media is going to be involved when there is legal issues. And there may be lack of interest in forming those committees together. Okay, moving on to section 8, talking about developing my plan and what do I need to do to consider and choose an option. So let's talk about the final reflection. I need to consider all options, and in order to do this, I need to make sure I'm looking at the data-informed information so that I can make a data-informed and equitable plan that supports school improvement and student development. I need to look at what I'm going to implement, and I need to consider all stakeholders, and I need to make sure that there is communication and relationship with all stakeholders. And I need to make sure I'm using great care and attention when I'm implementing the plan so that I am considering all stakeholders. Consult will be the next part of that developing of the plan. And again, this requires communication with all stakeholders, which would be administration within the district, my staff, my parents, my students, and all community members or stakeholders. And then last, I need to consider all 4 options, and I need to apply the knowledge, skills, and commitments necessary to improve my management, and consider that when I am looking at my options. So, section 9, I am going to talk about the plan I chose and who needs to know the information on the plan. And so I went with plan number 4, which would be everything from plan 3, where I had Mr. Barely step down, and I chose to have a staff member paid to do the president, and then also combining the 2 committees together so that there was less people working through the committees. So the first step of this plan and choosing my path would be number 1, I need to notify and discuss and communicate with my district administration and Board of Education so they're aware of what is happening. The second step would be I'm going to write and communicate that apology to not only my staff members and my school, but the community. The third step would be to visit with Mr. Barely in a non-threatening way and make sure I include my district admin during this meeting so that Mr. Barely is aware of us having him step down as the president of the foundation. The fourth step would be to make sure I research and appoint staff that are well qualified, and it sounds like with all of my staff being seasoned, I'm going to have quite a few to choose from, but just make sure that I have the right person in as the new president of the foundation. And then the next step will be to train the staff members, and I'm going to train my entire staff, not just the new president, so that everyone in the building is aware of fundraising laws and regulations. And that way, if we ever have to replace our foundation president with a new staff member, everyone is well aware of it. The sixth step in my path and my choice would be to meet with the site curriculum committee and the foundation committee and explain to both of them in separate meetings and then get them together as a combined committee. The seventh step in my path will be to train my committee members, which will include some staff, but also some community members. And then this would also be a good time if my staff has already been trained, they could also be part of our training committee. The 8th step in my plan will be to communicate with the community and make sure that they're all aware well of what is going on, and so that they are comfortable with upcoming fundraisers and the way the school is providing curriculum. The 9th step will be to provide that community training so that everybody is trained and well aware of the regulations and the rules. So the other thing when implementing my plan, I need to consider what may happen. And so some things that might pop up with this plan, I may have staff refuse to be present and attend trainings. And so we would have to deal with that as that comes up. I may have some refusal as far as the committees not wanting to combine, because people do have trouble with change. I may have lack of community support and involvement. The district administration may question my leadership. I may lose parental involvement, especially if there were followers of Mr. Barely. There may be low participation in the community trainings, and my Board of Education may not support me. And then, of course, there's always going to be the media involvement when there is something to do with legal in the school. So I need to consider what my next plan would be. And so my next plan B would be, if need be, I would meet with the Board of Education to discuss other options for curriculum and possible funding. I would possibly look at other community organizations to collaborate with. There in my current school, there are lots of community organizations that we work with and actually bring into the school to provide curriculum for our students. So that would be another option. And then I think another third financial option would be to consider grants for purchasing curriculum to help promote the future success and well-being of students and adults. So those are all things that we would look at if the plan did not go as I hope it would. So now that you are aware of the whole case study and what has happened, I feel like as a future building leader, this case has really helped me understand the importance of being involved and aware of fundraising that is happening in my building. I have definitely learned the consequences of not following local and state fundraising laws and how it can affect the future success and well-being of students and staff. It can not only affect my staff and students, but also myself. It can affect our and tarnish our history as far as my career, but it also can affect my parents and the community. I do not want any of my stakeholders to ever put themselves in a situation that can cause legal concern. And in this module, it has helped me apply all of the classroom information that I've learned throughout the class into a real world situation and how I would be able to handle it as a building leader. Here are a list of my references, and I used quite a few from throughout the class. I did some additional research on Kansas laws, and so there is a list of those. And I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.